Hello and welcome to the Books on Asia podcast, sponsored by Stonebridge Press, publisher of fine books on Asia for over 30 years, located at www.stonebridge.com. And I'm your host, Amy Chavez. And today we have with us Sarah Coomber. She's the author of The Same Moon, published by Camphor Press in 2020. And The Same Moon is a memoir about what happened when she left her wrecked Minnesota life and started teaching in Japan for 2 years. Sarah has an MFA in creative writing from Eastern Washington University, a master's in mass communication from the University of Minnesota, and level 4 certification in the Seiha School of Koto, which is, of course, a Japanese instrument. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Sure. Thanks for joining us today. And your book, The Same Moon, takes place when you came to Japan on the JET program, which for those who are unfamiliar, that's the government-sponsored Japan English teaching program. And you came in the 90s, specifically 1994 to 96. Is that correct?
That's right.
And at that time, the program was really in its infancy. And so your story, when I read it, I thought, okay, here's this young single American woman who comes to Japan to teach English, and we get to hear about your experiences, especially your experiences regarding being a woman in Japan at that time, which I found fascinating. So can you tell us about your book's journey and how this story came to end up being published by Camphor Press in 2020, when it took place quite a while ago? I sense that there's something more to that story.
Yes. There are multiple pieces to that story. I started writing what became The Same Moon when I was in Japan in 94 to 96. And the reason being, I had left my master's program. I was in the midst of it, and I still had to finish my master's project, kind of in lieu of thesis. I opted for more a creative work and ended up doing a series of essays about my experiences in Japan. So parts of it are really drawn almost directly from the writing I did at that time. When I defended my project, going through the process of the graduate program, my advisor said, you should turn this into a book. And I realized I really didn't know what that would look like. And it took me a long time to figure it out. And I started futzing with it a little bit, and then I abandoned ship, went on, and I was a reporter for a few years and a science writer, and then ended up going back to school for a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. And again, I needed a topic. And so I found myself back in my Japan brain for that topic, and actually went back to a high school exchange program focusing on that, and wrote on that, and that became my MFA thesis.
And that was also in Japan?
That was also in Japan. Thank you. Yes. And actually in the same area of Japan. So there was some cohesion with the whole thing. And I came out of that with this thesis, or this piece about my high school experience, and then just still didn't know how to make this into a book. I mean, it went on and on. I was trying different things and playing with it for years, really for years. And then finally set it aside and just got into my working life. And at one point, a friend contacted me who had been in a graduate school program with me and said, hey, I want to publish your thesis. And that's when I realized, no, this is not my story. I need to start over. And so I basically set everything aside and thought, what do I want this to be like? And I thought, I want this to be like a novel, but that's true. That's actually out of my life. And so I kind of went back and just started, what do I want people to know and how do I want them to know it? And just bit by bit started again. And I don't know if you want to go into this, a little insider baseball, but it was originally published in 2019. So there's this previous edition by a different publisher. My agent found the publisher and we got it out there. And then we didn't see eye to eye on some things. And I just had to let it go. And I said, look, keep whatever royalties you have, but give me my rights back. I need to just go. I need to be cut loose. And, I felt like I was playing chicken with the whole situation because I didn't have a backup plan. Meanwhile, as this was happening, the people from Camphor Press found me probably on Amazon. They found my book online, read it, and contacted me and asked me to write a chapter for the anthology, which you are in, Amy, as well, the Inaka anthology. And I was like, sure, because Inaka is all about the rural countryside, and that was my experience, and that's my passion in Japan is the rural areas. And so I was like, yeah, I'd love to write you a chapter. And so I did that. And when I sent them the finished chapter, I said in my email, and by the way, my book is available. Would you like my book too? And thank goodness they said yes.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So that was a seg into, basically when you said my book, you mean submitting it again for a reissue?
Yeah, because I didn't have a publisher anymore. And I just said, would you be interested in publishing my book, which you've already read, which is really unusual.
That is unusual. You already had their interest, so it was a perfect sale, wasn't it?
It was. And I just have to say, they made it so much of a better book. That publishing house, the edit that John Ross with Camper gave it was remarkable. I mean, he really made the words sing. So that was cool.
I can believe that. Yeah, he's very good, isn't he? And he's also coming on our podcast. So you'll want to listen to that one, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. I've never heard him speak. We've only been on email. So yeah.
Okay. He also does a podcast. He's not the podcast producer, but he's a guest on a podcast about Taiwan. The podcast that John Ross is a guest on is called Formosa Files. And he's from New Zealand.
Yes, yeah.
His accent when he speaks is completely different from his accent in email.
Is that right? I can imagine this.
No, he's a great guy. So then you came and what tell our readers about your wrecked life just a little bit, as a teaser to why someone of, your stature, especially at that time, would come to Japan.
Yeah. So I was, in the midst of my first graduate program in mass communication, and I had married right before I entered the graduate program. And pretty quickly the marriage started falling apart, and I wasn't really liking the graduate program. Like, everything felt like it was falling apart.
Was this kind of like the Narita divorce in Japan? Have you heard of this? Oh, it's so funny. The Narita divorce it's named after Narita Airport, right? So the couple goes on the honeymoon, and by the time they come back, they already want a divorce when they get home to the airport. Did yours last a little longer than that?
It lasted a little longer than that. But yeah, pretty quickly I knew this wasn't going to work. And it was nothing I envisioned that, like, by the time I was 24, that I'd be divorced, And I just felt like, I've wrecked my life. I have failed. I don't like my grad program. This has happened. And I just wanted to get out of there. And so, yeah, that's the wrecked life I ran from. Yeah.
So you ran to Japan and you ended up in, what was the name of the small town in Inaka?
So I was in Shuhocho in Yamaguchi-ken.
Okay. Yamaguchi's beautiful.
Yes. Yep. I am a Yamaguchi girl for sure. That's also where I did my high school exchange. And that's what I consider my Japan home,
Right. And when you went back, didn't you request Yamaguchi? Wasn't there something about a baseball player or...
Yes, there was. Yep. I absolutely requested to be back in Yamaguchi in my host family's small city, Hagishi, if you're familiar with that. I really connected with them in high school. And part of the reason that I maintained my contact with Japan was my goal was to be able to learn enough Japanese so I could go back and have actual conversations with them. Because when I first went, I didn't speak any Japanese. But then the other piece of it is there was a certain baseball player that I had a crush on. And I was wondering if, you never know. You go back to the same place, maybe you re-encounter the same people. And yeah, so that was part of the draw of Yamaguchi as well.
I enjoyed that story, that was kind of in the background of it, about, how people's lives change and how you maintain connections and such. Yeah. But there was, I want to talk a little bit about being a woman in Japan. I've been a woman in Japan a long time now, 30 years, I guess. And in some ways I've seen it change. In others, I really haven't. And especially if you're in the countryside, really things don't change that quickly, as they don't anywhere, I suppose, in the countryside. But there was one particular instance in your book that I thought was very telling. And I mean, I'll just say up front, your story is different from mine because I've never like lived with a host family. I've never dated anyone who is Japanese. So I don't have the insight that someone like you would have. But there was a point in the story where you talk about approaching a bridge. And you're on one side of this, I guess, river or canal. And there was a man approaching from the other side. Can you tell our readers about this scene?
Yeah, to set it up, I was with the man that I was dating at the time, and he was broaching the idea of marriage, and I was still sort of reeling from my divorce and not ready to discuss that. So it was a little bit of a fraught time. But we went on a trip to Kamikochi in the Japanese Alps, a beautiful area. Yeah, and it was in autumn. And so, it was just a lovely situation all around. So while we were there, we were off for a little hike. And we're walking along through the woods and enjoying, everything. And we came to this like narrow log bridge that had been put across this muddy patch so people wouldn't get their shoes all muddy. But I was, in this kind of state of prickliness, let's say, because of this whole marriage topic. And also just the fact that I was feeling very, maybe jaded is the word or something about office life in Japan and how I felt I was expected to serve tea to my male colleagues because I'm a woman and watching the other women kind of having to do these things. And I was just sort of on edge and prickly. And so we come to this log bridge, and at the same time, on the opposite side of the log bridge is this middle-aged man and his family. And they are probably on vacation, as we are. And they're approaching at about the same rate that we're approaching. And the man of that family, steps onto the bridge without giving a second thought to the fact that I'm about to step on my side. And due to where I was at, I decided, well, I'm going to step on too. And I started walking and he started walking and we kept walking and it became a little game of chicken, I think. And I was not going to give way. And he, I'm sure, didn't expect that he would ever be expected to give way. And so all of a sudden we meet in the middle and it's this like mush of trying to get around a stranger and him trying to get around me. And, it's awkward. And I don't remember if one of us fell off or not. But anyway, everybody got to the other side. But when I got to the other side, my boyfriend was definitely unimpressed with my behavior and told me so. And all of a sudden I looked at him and thought, he is just one of them. Like in that instant, he kind of went from being somebody in my corner who seemed to understand my confusion and my concerns and my frustrations to someone who was sort of judging me, as I thought maybe that middle-aged man did.
He thought that you should have yielded to the man?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because I created a situation and we don't want to create situations.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, this is, it's fascinating to me to listen to, someone like you talk, because I also taught English at university and such. No one would ever think of asking me to serve tea to the men. That was left with the older women, Japanese women. I mean, they just wouldn't ask a foreign woman to do that, So, and I certainly have never yielded to a man when crossing a bridge, but no one was there to yell at me for it either. So, do you think things have changed now?
Can I add one thing in before I answer that? To be fair, in my offices, I don't know that, well, I know nobody asked me to serve.
You're expected to do it.
It wasn't, I don't even know that they expected me to do it. But I just had this sense, it's a small office. All the women are standing up and doing this. And in one office, it was 4 times a day.
Oh, right.
And here I am sitting and I held my ground for a while, for a few weeks, I think, where I just kept doing my work and thanked them for the tea they gave me and thought that's their choice. But I started feeling more and more like, I need to be in solidarity here. These are my neighbors. These are my colleagues.
Sure.
And then I called my host mom and I was like, Okasa-san, here's the situation. What do I do? And she was like, you serve tea. And I trust that woman. She's my Japanese mom. And I'm like, okay. So that's kind of the thing. So just for the record, they never asked me, but boy, were they happy when I started serving tea. I mean,
yes.
a shift.
You hear this thing a lot about serving tea. It's one of the things that's often brought up, by, foreign women is why are women still serving tea to men? But yeah, are there anything that the men do for the women in the office?
Well, and that's the interesting thing, because I did start to have conversations with the women about this. And they said, well, this is what we do because the men, when we have undokai, sports day or whatever, the men set up the tents. We don't have to set up the tents. So they do that. So we do this.
And it's so true about Japan being everything's compartmentalized. And they are happy with that because they, know what they're supposed to do and they just do it. And then they will be reciprocated at some point by something else. And it's all kind of, decided beforehand.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know there were so many nuances that I couldn't see or understand. I was such a newbie, but yeah, it was.
So another thing I liked about your book is I believe, and you can tell me if this is true or not, that it is the only book out there that writes about the JET Japan Exchange Teaching Program from a woman's point of view. We have Bruce Feiler's Learning to Bow. We have even Will Ferguson's Hokkaido Highway Blues, Aka Hitching Rides with Buddhas. Mm-hmm. He didn't talk about his JET experience, but he was a JET participant. And that's how he got to Japan. And he does mention that a couple of times in his book. So are there any other women out there writing about the JET program?
Not that I'm aware of. And I have to say, you did a review for me on Amazon, I believe, where you mentioned this idea that it might be the only female JET memoir. And you made my day when I saw that. I was so thrilled because I'm like, yeah, I thought so. And you mentioned Bruce Feiler's Learning to Bow. And I remember when I was a JET, because he did JET even before I did. And I had that book on my shelf as a JET. And I just remember thinking, I want to do the female version of this book. That was one of my goals in writing The Same Moon is I wanted to show the women's side of it.
That's great. Well, let me tell you how I got a hold of your book. Is that John Rouse at Camphor Press sent it to me, and he said, "Now he prefaced it. I don't want to derail you from other things you're reading and your deadlines because he knows I have a lot of deadlines." And of course, in true fashion, I picked it up immediately and started reading it and read it from cover to cover. Yeah. And I was like, wow, this is great. And that's you're right. We really need more stuff out there from women talking about Japan and from different perspectives as well. I thought that was important because you were a bit more on the inside than someone, for example, like me, who's on the outside looking in. But, there are variations of that too, because if you want to be accepted into your community, then you have to do certain things, don't you? And it's this game about giving, but not giving too much and maintaining your foreign ways and your own values.
I found that so interesting in your book that I've been reading The Widow Priest and Octopus Hunter and how you actually talk about that.
It?
Oh yeah. And it was fantastic. And I really liked how you talked about that, how you made some conscious choices of, how embedded am I going to be? Because then the expectations change. And I was like, that is so true. She was so smart to, keep some distance there.
Well, yeah, you kind of learn as you go along. But that's so funny because you're also a writing coach, aren't you?
Yes.
That's so embarrassing that a writing coach is reading my book. I'm like,
Oh my gosh, it's fantastic.
How intimidating.
No. And I have to say, I just loved how you went around the island and you did. I mean, it's like ethnographic research. You're in the midst of it and you're talking to everybody. And it's lovely and dropping these little clues about Eiko throughout. I just so enjoyed it. And I thought this woman's living my life because that was something I wanted to do was go back to Shuhocho and do something like that. And, it didn't happen for me. So I'm so glad you did it.
Well, sure. I'm happy to do such things on your behalf and all of the women in the world who want to live in Japan on a small island of 400 people. Not
it's
sure how
so
many they are,
amazing.
but yeah, the woman's point of view, I do believe, is different. And, a lot of people do say to me when they come out to the island that they're envious, yet anyone can actually do it. It's just a matter of the type of person you are. And for me, there was just no doubt about it. I was going to move to this small island and do my own thing. And I had lived in the city for 4 years already in Okayama City. So this gets us to the point about what kind of women would you recommend to come to Japan on the JET program? And what kind of woman would you not recommend it to?
That is such an interesting question because I feel like I'm a bit of an evangelist. Like, hey, go. I encourage people to do this. Like,
Totally.
why doesn't everybody do this? Right? Yeah. I kind of feel like everybody who has an interest in Japan or in just another culture. It's a great opportunity to sort of embed in a community. And the level you can go to depends on the community and on your personality, basically, right? So I think so many people, I think, could enjoy that experience. You asked, like, who should not do it? And I think that if you aren't willing to be, flexible and aren't willing to reconsider your assumptions, then yeah, you probably are not a prime candidate for this because you really do have to learn to get along in various ways that you wouldn't expect that you'd have to.
It requires amazing growth, doesn't it, in you as a person when coming to Japan. And when you do leave, if I've heard people leave, I haven't yet, but when I do, you really will feel the benefits, I think.
Yeah. And I do think the one other thing that's important to have when you come is like some sense of yourself, some sense of what makes you tick and what you need for your mental health and for to be yourself. You kind of want to have a sense of yourself before you embark on something like this.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, that's really nice. Thank you. And when you were in Japan, I believe that we both came to Japan at around the same time, back in the 90s. And of course, then there was no internet. There was no email even. And the only thing you could do was write letters or, make long distance phone calls, which were very expensive. So even when you made them, they were short and just, yeah, I'm still alive. Everything's fine. Goodbye. And I was wondering what you really missed from home at that time.
Obviously, my people, my family and friends. But cheddar cheese, that's what I missed. I was obsessed with cheese and I was obsessed with finding canned tomatoes. Those were two things that, yeah.
Oh, I totally understand the cheese one.
My grandfather from Canada, he sent me a shipment of cheese at one point, which was fantastic.
I heard about a Dutch guy who brought in his luggage one of those huge wheels of cheese.
Smart man.
Yeah, the cheese obsession is something that's hard to shake. And now in Japan, you can get different kinds of cheeses, but they're so expensive. It's kind of ridiculous, but they do make Hokkaido camembert cheese now, at least. And, but yeah, that gets, after a while you want, different kinds of cheese, but yeah, they do have them.
But I do have to say, I am thankful that I went to Japan when I did, that immersion, because it was such a total immersion, and being in the Inaka, in the countryside on top of it, like I really had to get to know my neighbors and get to know my community and just be in it. Like I couldn't go, like the other foreigners would all be on rail lines and meeting up every weekend. And I didn't have a railway station. I had to take 2 buses to get to a train station. So that meant that, well, I think I'll just stay put. And, I'd like to talk to somebody who's doing an exchange now or doing JET right now and about how it is to like be seeing everybody and what they're doing in real time on Facebook and social media and that sort of thing. I think that it must be a very different experience now to have all that communication all the time.
I think it is. And I think that when you didn't have that, the other thing was that you really had to deal with problems on your own. You had to figure it out yourself with no input from someone else. You couldn't just, call up your, your friends at home or your parents, or and say, oh, what do I do? And I think also that's probably what part of what has made you such a good writer is that you took that stress out in your writing, and that was a release for you.
That is so true. Yes, it was my therapy. Writing, I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And thankfully, my mom saved all the letters I sent home and the emails. We did get email after I got there in the mid 90s. She saved it all. And it really was helpful in writing this book because, wow, those memories were pretty fresh when I read back over those.
Absolutely. Yeah. But that's a good start for anyone who's interested. And being a woman coming to Japan, especially any woman who's coming on the JET program really should read this. Or if they've already been on the JET program, even I'm sure, be able to, recognize a lot of the things in it. And it's just a nice overall read. It's kind of a coming of age story as well for you. And then after you went, we're going to wrap up here, but after you went back to the States, then what happened?
After I went back to the States, I hit the working world and, I want to bring something up. I hope I have time. Mm-hmm. So one interesting thing, I think when I was in Shuhocho and I was trying to explain to people how strange it was that we were serving coffee and tea, and, this would not happen where I came from. And all this, and that everybody was equal where I came from, grasshopper is what I think now, now that I've had experience in the States. I remember one of my first jobs back, I was working like 14-hour days, not so I would get a raise, but I was just trying to do a really good job and learn my career and all of this. And when it came time to talk about raises, I remember that my supervisor called me into his office. And this is in the United States. And he said, well, it's time for raises and all that. And he said, I'm sorry, but I won't be giving you one this year. And I was like, oh, okay. He said, times are a little tough. And, there's a lot of men in the office and they have wives and children. And I just feel like I need to give any raises to them.
And did you punch him in the face?
No, I was gobsmacked. I was dumbfounded, right?
Wow.
Especially after coming out of Japan and thinking like, at least my country is more equal. And then and it was a really eye-opening thing for me. And I'm kind of glad it happened because I had to realize that I was selling them this image I had of my own country that turned out to be much more elusive than I realized. Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you wanted to say before we say goodbye to you, as sad as it is? Are you working on anything new too? That's what I wanted to know.
Oh, yeah. I'm working on a memoir about what happened when my husband and I adopted a toddler from India and what we learned about how different life and learning and love can be from this child.
That's beautiful. I want to read that one.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited about it.
Do you have a publisher for that?
No, not yet. Not yet. I'm kind of on the slow boat with it.
Yeah, okay.
But you asked if there's anything else, and there was one other thing I just wanted to say, just about my host family and how they have been such a huge influence. In the midst of all this, the tea serving and the gender issues and all that, and my host family was so amazing because they were a 3-generation household with the Obachan, the grandma, and then the couple, and then their 2 daughters, one of whom was my age and my same age host sister. I was kind of confused by the situation there because the host mom lived with her mother-in-law and the girls. And the host dad, of course, got transferred around various places. And that was very new to me because my family was, all in one household back in the United States. I think I kind of looked at it suspiciously, like, what's the deal here? And how come this guy is like off? But I always saw that every weekend he came home, every weekend, and he would take us wherever we needed to go, wherever my host mom wanted to go, whatever she wanted to do. He was all over it. And I was just back in October in Japan, and I got to stay with them. Yes, for the first time in 15 years.
That's great.
And they're almost 80 now. And I've known them since I was 16.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. They were just amazing. And I had more appreciation for their relationship than ever because they have this beautiful give and take. and this beautiful, like everything is kind of a group project with them, but they have their areas of responsibility. And I never hear them in all these years when I've gotten together with them. I've never heard them bicker. They just kind of like, okay. And oh, can I help you with that? And I came home just feeling inspired, like there's still time. I can still evolve to that. So,
Right.
In light of all this gender parity stuff and all, I feel like there's some really beautiful things in the relationships in Japan. And I'm so thankful that I have their model in my life. They've taught me so much.
That's wonderful. That's beautiful. And isn't growth an amazing thing?
Yes.
Isn't it great to be able to look back on things and learn so much from them, and then to go back to Japan again and catch up where you left off, and then look back again? And that's great. Very nice. And so our last question for our interviewees is always what their 3 favorite books on Japan are. So I'm sorry, I know it's hard to limit it to 3, but maybe in light of our conversation, you could pick 3 that might be, helpful for our listeners.
Sure. So I do have this crazy long list. you know me already. So I'm just going to go to my first entree really to Japan was through the Shogun miniseries on TV when I was in junior high. And my mom got the book by James Clavell, Shogun. And I suppose it's Shogun, isn't it? I'm still saying it as I did when I was a kid, Shogun.
But the thing is it's such a famous book that everyone else says Shogun also. So I think it's okay.
That makes me feel better. Thank you. So I think I was in 8th grade and I carried that like 3 or 4 inch thick book around with me for weeks or probably months reading it and just was entranced, but didn't have that sense of, oh, I want to go there, but just loving the story,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that is one that I think really I should reread at some point. And another one is The Accidental Office Lady by Laura Kriska.
I thought that was great.
Yeah.
It's old, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. It was, I looked it up. I think it came out originally in 98. Is that right?
Mm-hmm, that sounds right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So she was kind of in our time frame. And I really loved seeing it because I believe she was at Honda and really doing office lady work as maybe their first foreigner doing this.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
and it was funny too. It's always nice, when the writer has a sense of humor.
Yeah. Yeah. So that one was inspiring to me. And then another one that I have to mention just because of the gender equity issue is A Half Step Behind by Jane Condon. And I'm not sure how that holds up now, but it's based on many interviews she did in the 1980s with women and talks about everything from career to marriage to dating, omiai, all these different things. And I found it fascinating and kind of therapeutic at the time because it sort of helped me realize that what I was experiencing and, where I was feeling a little bit discombobulated as a woman in rural Japan, that, I was experiencing something that was common throughout the country in different ways. But there's so many more.
I know, so many more. Yeah. Well, thank you, Sarah, so much. It's been very inspiring to me to talk to you today, and I hope for our listeners as well. Be sure to check out Sarah's book, The Same Moon. You can buy that either on Amazon or at camphorpress.com. Now, you can find Sarah at sarahcoomber.com. While you're there, you can sign up for her e-newsletter called Loon Landing. And she is also a writing coach. She teaches some writing classes, and she especially loves talking about writing memoirs. So do give her a visit at sarahcoomber.com. I will also put in links to her social media. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Amy. This was a lot of fun.
You've been listening to the Books on Asia podcast, produced and edited by Amy Chavez and Michael Palmer. Logo by Alex Kerr. The Books on Asia podcast is sponsored by Stonebridge Press, publishing quality books on Japan and Asia for over 30 years. Stonebridge Press is thrilled to share that Tokyo Stroll, a guide to city-side tracks and easy exploration, is now available in both print and digital editions everywhere. And to celebrate, they've put together a discounted ebook bundle perfect for anyone heading to Japan. Get 4 books for 50% off. Tokyo Stroll, Exploring Kyoto, Amy's Guide to Best Behavior in Japan, and Japan from Anime to Zen. And I'm your podcast host, Amy Chavez, author of Amy's Guide to Best Behavior in Japan and The Widow, the Priest, and the Octopus Hunter, Discovering a Lost Way of Life on a Secluded Japanese Island. For more interviews, book reviews, and other features, visit the Books on Asia website at booksonasia.net.